I used to believe that love was unbreakable, that if you gave someone your heart, they'd guard it like it was their own. For years, that belief was my truth. Until the night I came home early. The rain was relentless, hammering against the windshield as if trying to warn me. My key slid into the lock, and for a second, I hesitated. Something in my chest told me not to open that door. But I did, and in one single heartbeat, my world collapsed. There they were, my wife Anna, and my best friend Daniel. Not in some innocent conversation, not caught off guard, but tangled together, lost in something that used to belong only to me. The sound of her laughter, that same laugh that once healed me, now sliced through me like a knife. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I just stood there, watching the two people I trusted most destroy everything I believed in. When they finally noticed me, the room froze. She gasped my name. Daniel tried to speak, some pathetic excuse already forming on his tongue. But I couldn't hear it. My mind was a storm of static rage, heartbreak, disbelief, all colliding until I felt nothing at all. That night, I left. Not just the house, the life I'd built. The man I was died in that doorway. For weeks, I disappeared. No calls, no explanations. I didn't even tell her she was free. I let her sit in silence, wondering what I'd do. And truth be told, I didn't know either. Until one morning, I woke up and realized something simple. They took everything from me. My love, my trust, my peace. So, I was going to take everything from them, but not in anger, not in haste. No, my revenge would be quiet, deliberate, and unforgettable. Because sometimes, the best way to destroy someone is to let them believe they've already won. When you stand with the pieces of your life scattered at your feet, people expect you to do something dramatic: punch a wall, burn a photograph, howl until your throat goes raw. I did none of that. Drama belongs to those who want witnesses. I wanted results. I moved out the week after I found them. I rented a small room above a bookstore, the kind of place with creaky floors and the smell of old paper. It felt right, a quiet, dusty bunker where I could think without being chased by memory. I spent a lot of time awake there, tracing every small choice that led to that doorway. The nights I stayed late at work, the laugh I didn't notice, the days I assumed everything was fine. I replayed their faces and cataloged them like evidence. Not for a courtroom, for a plan. The plan had rules. No violence. No public spectacle. No impulsive confrontations. If I was going to take them apart, I wanted it surgical, slow enough that every touch left a scar, clean enough that the world would call it consequence and not vengeance. First, information. They were sloppy in ways only people who think themselves clever ever are. Daniel was proud of his routines. He always parked on the same block. He always stopped at the same deli for lunch. Anna left receipts in her purse that meant nothing to anyone but me. I learned their rhythms until they felt like a map I could walk blindfolded. I started small, like a man testing water. A missed coffee pickup here, forgotten note to his partner there. I called the contractor who'd remodeled their loft and asked questions about invoices, idle questions, nothing accusatory, just enough to make him think twice. The contractor remembered a check that cleared late. The contractor kept the memory. Memory is an ember that starts whole fires when fed the right wood. Then came leverage. People who betray others often build their comfort on other people's silence. I worked those silences. I reached out to names I knew Daniel had burned in the past, a former colleague shoved out of a promotion, a photographer stiffed on payment, a temp who'd been cut. I didn't shout injustice. I offered a trade, tell the truth to the right ear, and some of your losses get answered. Greed and grievance are good allies. They move faster than pity. Technology was another friend. I taught myself to read the things we all leave behind: timestamps, metadata, online backups. Not to hack, but to save the crumbs that make a case, a photo left in the cloud, a calendar invite that didn't match a story. Truths hide where people think they're private. I stitched those crumbs into a ribbon of fact. The more I compiled, the less I felt like a ghost and the more like an architect. But the cruelest weapon I kept for last: tenderness. Cheaters are expert at compartmentalizing. They can hold two lives in their hands because each life has different rules. I mimicked what they expected of me. I sent Anna small, unassuming texts, memories of a trip we'd loved, a joke only we shared. I cooked dishes she liked and left them on the counter for her to find. I acted like the man she'd known when love was safe. It was theater. It was mercy turned into camouflage. And as she softened, she made mistakes. Mistakes are everything. A photo saved, a message left unread, a voicemail never deleted. Each is a crack in a mirror. Anna started to lie less carefully. A certain word slipped into a text, at times stamped in the wrong zone. Daniel grew defensive in meetings, his voice pitched higher, his smile arriving late. The people around them sensed it. Humans are lousy at holding contradiction. When your story doesn't match the paperwork, other people pick the paperwork. There were nights I wanted to stop. The ache was not the sharp one I'd felt in the doorway. It was the long, deep weariness that comes from being exact, from counting hearts like ledgers. I saw Anna in the grocery aisle once, pushing a cart, and looking smaller than she'd ever seemed. For a moment, a blunted part of me wished to call out, to confess the catalog of my surveillance, to stand in the bright fluorescent lights and tear this all open. But confession would be a cheap relief. It would let them off with spectacle. I wanted them to feel what I have felt, the slow erosion of certainty, the small, consistent betrayals of dignity. So I kept building. I arranged for a minor audit at Daniel's firm, not public, just the sort of internal review that makes men sweat. I contacted a journalist I trusted and gave them a small hint, just a hint of a pattern. I never planted lies. I supplied curated truth. It is amazing how convincing the truth looks once you place it in a frame. The world began to move. A vendor asked for receipts. A bank flagged a transfer. Anna came home one night in tears because a client had mentioned a different name in the meeting notes, a name she'd denied ever mentioning. Their reactions were not dramatic. They were bureaucratic, which is worse. Being accused in a court of paper is colder than any scream. The long taking isn't about fury. It's about patience. It's the slow, relentless work of assembling an inevitability they can't explain away. And when the first real cracks appear, when the company asks for audits, when friends start to look sideways, you don't feel victory. You feel the hiss of the mechanism you set into motion, and understand finally that once the machinery runs, it feeds on everything nearby. The first domino would fall soon. I could see it on the horizon like the flash of distant lightning. I'd done the quiet work. I'd sharpened the edges. Now I only needed to watch the light bend and wait for the room to fill with the sound of consequence. There's a peculiar cruelty in watching a life you once loved begin to fold itself apart. It does not happen in grand gestures. It happens in the small, bureaucratic moments, the ones that feel like sand slipping through a hand. The first time I saw them truly frightened, it was over an invoice. Daniel had always been slick with paper. He could charm a vendor into lowering a price and then file it under creative accounting as if creativity were a virtue in finance. I traced one such entry back through months of records, a reimbursement labeled for a client dinner, deposited to an account that had no corporate tie. It was an ugly little thing, and by itself it would have been shrugged off. But once you begin to collect ugliness like shells, you find patterns. The pattern showed up on a Tuesday morning when the head of procurement asked Daniel for receipts in a tone that could have been read as polite or as a knife. I watched him across the open plan office. He was a statue someone had put into motion and then forgotten how to stop. His replies were quick, then. A junior analyst who'd idolized him for years hesitated when I caught his eye. The analyst's fingers trembled on the keyboard as he forwarded an audit request up the line, the kind of forwarding that carries guilt with it. Anna started to misalign too. Little slips, a calendar invite that claimed one meeting but logs showed another. A photo uploaded to her cloud that contained a background detail she'd never meant to leave, a hotel lamp. A partial keycard, a city skyline at 2 in the morning. She began to answer texts with short sentences, the sort that betray nerves. Once, she left a voicemail on our home phone, a tiny, frantic "please call me," and then cursed when she realized what she'd done. Her hand hovered over the delete button, and decision on her face like a person caught between betraying and being betrayed by their own habit. I never let them see panic in me. I kept being the man who forgave, who loved, whose patience was a steady rhythm. That was the key. People behave differently around someone they believe to be wounded but stable. They rush to hide, to cover, to perform contrition. Their performances did the heavy work for me. They made mistakes trying to control the narrative. As the internal noises grew louder, auditors, whispered meetings, a quiet council consultation, rumor started building its own momentum. Rumor is a social engine that consumes credibility. Friends who'd once toasted Daniel's promotions began to ask awkwardly about his travel schedule. Vendors who'd once smiled and waved now requested signed paperwork. The cheap scaffolding he'd built to hold his life together creaked and sagged under weight it wasn't engineered to support. There were moments when the moral calculus I'd constructed felt thin. I found myself at the grocery store one evening, staring at a package of pasta, thinking of Anna's hands on a roll of receipt tape. I wanted to collapse and tell her everything. I wanted to throw the files in the air and let the truth be a mess. But confession would have made them the drama's victims, and drama would have let sympathy patch them back together. I wanted the kind of consequence that leaves no neat stitches. So I escalated subtly. I leaked an edited but accurate timeline to a compliance consultant I'd once done a favor for. She passed it on, in professional jargon, to a client who happened to sit on one of our vendor panels. I forwarded an anonymous tip to a small business news outlet with a reputation for careful sourcing. Facts traveled faster when they felt unavoidable. The journalist didn't ask for spectacle. He asked for records. Records are merciless. When the first public piece ran, it was clinical or dry facts, a cadence that didn't invite outrage so much as inspection. But inspection invites legal counsel, and legal counsel invites a far more dangerous thing than jail: the erosion of trust. Board members convened in closed rooms and used soft phrases like reputational risk and fiduciary responsibility. Those phrases carry the same weight as a verdict when money is involved. Daniel's veneer of control cracked first in private. A voicemail he recorded and then erased. An email he sent in haste and then tried to retract. A client dinner where he answered questions poorly and then left without finishing his wine. In public, he tried to be composed. In private, he begged for time. Time is a currency you can't buy. It's the one thing I'd built my schedule around. I'd spent my nights cataloging, not raging. He tried to bargain, and bargaining only revealed the depth of his fear. Anna was less performative and more raw. She started showing up at odd hours at the little bookstore where I lived above, pretending to browse, her hands fidgety, a tendency toward small talk that faltered into silence when we met eyes. Once she dropped a thermos by the shelf and left it there with a note I didn't open. Whoever she'd become was fraying, but that fraying made her dangerous, because it made her unpredictable. Unpredictable people make mistakes. The collateral damage began to arrive with the steady cadence of winter rain. A temp I'd never met texted me to say she'd been let go because of budget freezes. A long-time vendor called with a tremor in his voice saying he'd been asked to suspend shipments until clarity. People who had nothing to do with betrayal were now counting the cost. That knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. One night, I watched Daniel leave the building under the sodium lights, moving like a man who didn't recognize his reflection. He looked at me once, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to admit: fear. Not for himself, not at first, but fear for all the facadas he'd built, the ones that now had to be dismantled. Piece by piece. When the first investigator arrived at his office the next morning, it was quiet. A knock at the door, a polite request for cooperation. No camera crews, no shouting. That was the point. The slow, administrative unmaking is more lethal than spectacle. It leaves a person with time to sit with the fact of their life unraveling. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow and exact. The revenge was working in the way I'd hoped it would: inevitable, inexorable, righteous in a ledger's way. But as the room filled with professionals who spoke in case numbers and clauses, I realized something I hadn't anticipated: the life I'd planned to reclaim would be different, because I was different now. The map had delivered its destination. The next question was whether I wanted to live anywhere inside it. They tell you the hardest part of revenge is the first strike. They lie. The hardest part is watching the machine you built turn and keep turning, knowing every cog you greased also grinds someone else's hands. The noise of consequence is not dramatic. It's administrative. It's boardroom minutes, vendor holds, bank freezes, and polite emails with legalese for teeth. It's the slow unspooling of a life that used to be loud with laughter and now speaks only in memos. By the time the auditors finished their initial rounds, Daniel was a different man. He had that particular look of someone who sleeps in clothes not meant for sleeping. His smile had lost its practiced width. When he laughed, it did not reach his eyes. I saw him once in the lobby, talking to a counselor I'd been tipped about weeks earlier to men speaking in the language of containment. He mouthed something that might have been an excuse. The counselor listened and then left without any flourish. That's when you know the script has flipped to professionals replace friends. The first public meeting was a formality dressed as leadership. The CEO read a short statement about internal discrepancies and commitment to transparency, and the room tasted like metal. Investors called one by one, voices wry and polite, asking for assurances their money would not be the next headline. I answered some of their emails with the steady, corporate tone I'd cultivated, calm, factual, and movable. Sometimes I surprised myself with how unshakable I sounded. It felt like wearing someone else's skin, a suit tailored for a version of me who cared only for results. At home, and his face changed in ways that were small but mortal. The woman who once left flowers on the counter now rearranged them obsessively when I came in. She avoided my gaze the way a person avoids puddles she fears stepping in. One afternoon she left a note in the kitchen that read, simply, "We need to talk." I folded it, put it in my wallet, and walked out without answering. Silence can be louder than any argument. They scrambled. They tried to rewrite the story with charm and contrition. Daniel issued a half-hearted apology on social media, the kind that reads like an ad script and not like a human confession. People reacted with 1,000 tiny judgments. Some were cruel, some were protective, but none of them asked the real question, not whether he'd done wrong, but how we had come to build a world that made betrayal possible. That question haunted me more than any headline. In the quiet between deadlines, I found myself thinking about the small choices, the late nights I'd applauded, the compromises we'd both made for the company, the times we'd agreed that growth deserved silence. To attack Daniel was to attack that fabric. I had cut threads that ran through other lives. The ledger balanced, yes, but the entries were heavy. Then came the confrontation I had avoided, the one that felt inevitable as a tide. Daniel showed up at my temporary studio one rain-slicked evening, not with bravado but with that hollowed look of a man who'd been asked to step off a cliff and had found he could. He didn't pound on the door. He didn't demand answers. He stood on the stoop, voice small. "Tell me why," he said. "Why did you do it? Why dismantle everything?" The question was simple. It had a childlike cruelty because it assumed a single motive could explain a labyrinth. I invited him in out of a crooked kindness I didn't own, made coffee, and listened while he explained in fragments: pressure, fear, the smell of opportunity. He kept returning to a sentence that sounded rehearsed. I wanted to secure our future. He spoke it like a prayer. "You secured something," I said. "Just not ours." He dropped down, hands between his knees. For a moment I saw the man I'd hired 12 years ago, hungry, capable, full of misbegotten bravado. Then the mask slipped, and the raw hurt showed. "You broke me," he whispered, not angry but astonished, as if the betrayal of his own moral elasticity surprised him more than any punishment. It would have been easier if anger arrived. Instead I felt a cold that was almost pity. Pity is a dangerous thing in a room where judgments have to be held. It can undo resolve. It can make you reach for forgiveness like a lifeline. I didn't reach. I reminded myself of the doorway, the laugh, the dry smell of someone else's cologne in my sheets. Those memories did not forgive easily. He asked if there was any way to fix it. I thought about the papers, the phone records, the invoices I'd compiled, the people who trusted me enough to come forward. Fix had been a currency he spent when he wanted favors. It was not a tool for undoing the architecture of deceit. "You can confess," I told him. "You can name it. You can sit in the public and say your name is not clean. That will hurt." He flinched at the admission, and for a brief second his eyes asked me if I wanted him to be destroyed. The answer was obvious. I wanted consequence, not annihilation. The line between them blurred in the steam of our coffee. After he left, I sat alone and finally let the questions I'd muffled rise. What had I done to become the kind of man who could orchestrate ruin with such calm? Revenge is a teacher with a cruel curriculum. It teaches you how to plan, how to wait, how to make truth into a weapon. It also teaches you how to justify yourself. And justification is a story that makes monsters out of men who once loved. The week following, the company announced a restructuring. Daniel resigned under a cloud that smelled like the end of an era. Anna posted a brief message about privacy and healing. Her followers offered flowers and platitudes. Life, The world, the endless machine of people and projects, shuffled on. But in that shuffle, I noticed another sound, the quiet of people picking up pieces. A clerk who lost work. A vendor whose supply chain stalled. The junior analyst whose internship had ended abruptly. They emailed me, some with anger, some with questions, some with resigned thanks. Their voices threaded the ledger in ways spreadsheets couldn't show. I realized then that consequence is not a single arrow. It's a web. Pull one string and the pattern shifts in ways you cannot always predict. That realization did not stop me. It did, however, change the cost. I had wanted to reclaim what was mine. I had aimed for measure. Instead, I found myself tallying on a scale that weighed more than reputation and money, the weight of lives nudged by my hand. When the dust settled, the empty office chairs and shuttered calendar invites told a story everyone understood. Betrayal begets fallout. But by the dim light of my kitchen that night, the truth felt smaller and more human. I had engineered justice, yes, but justice had hands that cut both ways. The question of whether I had become the thing I hated was quiet now, persistent, and unlike the board's decisions, it refused to be filed away. It's strange how quiet life becomes once the storm ends. The world doesn't celebrate your revenge. There are no fireworks, no cinematic music swelling behind your final act. There's just silence, heavy and forgiving, and in that silence, you finally hear everything you were trying so hard to drown out. Months passed. The scandal had faded from headlines, replaced by fresher sins. Daniel was gone, not just from the company, but from the city. Some said he left for therapy, others that he disappeared to the coast to start over. No one really knew. I didn't care to ask. Anna moved out of our home quietly one morning. She left behind her wedding ring and a note I still haven't read. It sits in my drawer, sealed, like a wound that refuses to close. Sometimes I tell myself I'll open it when I'm ready. Other times, I know I never will. I thought I'd feel victorious. I thought I'd look at the wreckage and feel something like peace. But vengeance doesn't end when the other person falls. It ends when you look in the mirror and realize you've been standing in ashes of your own. There's an odd moment of awareness that comes when the adrenaline fades. You start noticing the emptiness in small things, the way coffee tastes duller, the way mornings feel longer, the way silence presses against your chest like guilt. You rebuild, yes, but the pieces never fit the same. I remember walking through the city one night, the streets glowing with the reflection of passing headlights. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere, laughing, talking, existing, and I was just there, present, but detached. A ghost of a man who'd mistaken destruction for justice. That's when it hit me. Revenge hadn't given me closure, it had given me clarity. I didn't want what I lost back. I wanted to be the kind of man who could survive losing it. Daniel had betrayed me. Anna had broken me. But I had done something far worse. I had let them define who I became. Every move, every calculated strike, every sleepless night spent plotting. It was still about them. They had owned my mind long after I'd stripped them of everything else. So, I made a decision. No more watching. No more waiting. No more living inside their shadows. I sold the remnants of the company, donated most of what was left, and moved to a small coastal town somewhere quiet, where no one knew my name. I rented a cabin near the cliffs. Mornings became simple again, coffee, walks along the beach, the sound of waves colliding with the rocks. At first, the quiet felt unbearable. Then, slowly, it began to heal me. One morning, as the sun rose over the water, I took out the last piece of my old life, Anna's note. I held it for a while, feeling its weight. Then, instead of opening it, I tore it in half and let the pieces drift away with the wind. Because forgiveness doesn't always come from understanding. Sometimes, it comes from letting go of the need to understand at all. As I watched the paper vanish into the sea, I finally whispered the words I had never been able to say. I forgive you. And I forgive myself. The tide carried the pieces away, small fragments of a life burned, now cooled into something quiet and real. And for the first time in years, I felt something pure. Not victory, not revenge, peace.